Hi, I'm Ted Price from Insomniac Games, and on this episode of The Game Maker's Notebook, I spent time with Matt Nava. He's the founder and creative director for Giant Squid. Giant Squid has created two absolutely gorgeous games with ABZÜ and The Pathless. Matt and I covered a lot of topics, including the challenges of balancing being a CD with running a studio, Giant Squid's unique culture, and what it's like to be an independent studio today. Please join us.
Welcome to The Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Matt, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and congratulations on The Pathless. It's a beautiful, beautiful game. And having played it, it's a really nice sort of alternative existence for me when it comes to exploration and having a sort of a Zen-like experience in a game.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we tried to turn some of the things you see in a lot of other games on their head. Take the things that made you remember that you're in a game out and focus on creating an atmosphere and letting you really be there, and focusing on that exploration. That was the thesis of the game for sure.
Well, it's when it comes to the the games you make at Giant Squid, it's definitely not something that's new, because I felt like ABZÜ had the same feel, and I want to get into that in particular, but more importantly, what were your influences growing up? What has inspired you to make games like this?
Yeah, you know, it's something that I can't escape. Whatever I make has this feel to it, and I hear that a lot. You know, I worked on Journey and Flower before, and people can feel the connection between these games, which is interesting because it kind of happens accidentally. You look back and realize, yeah, that was those are the connections. But yeah, growing up, you know, I was lucky enough to travel around the world with my family. Got to go to Europe and Mexico, and went to India and saw a lot of museums and ancient ruins. My parents are artists, so they always wanted to check out all the museums wherever we went. And so I was always looking at, you know, old paintings and suits of armor, and I love all that stuff. I love ancient art. I love cave paintings and hieroglyphs and that kind of stuff. And it always felt like it had so much. You could just feel the history in those objects, and you could feel this culture that was lost. It was vibrant, and it's always just kind of just really fascinating to see those artifacts and imagine the world that they came from. And, you know, that's kind of what we're trying to do in these Giant Squid games, is create this place that evokes that sense that there is another world here. You're getting a glimpse of it through this artifact of the game, and letting your mind kind of fill in the rest. I think that's one of the the kind of connections to my earlier life.
I think that's fantastic that you embraced going to museums. I know that I kind of always resisted it when my family would go to museums, but to be into sort of ancient art at an early age, that sounds great. Did you always know that you wanted to make games?
No, I just knew that I wanted to make images. I love to draw. That's what I do. My thing is that I can draw with a pencil, and I've just been doing that since I was born, basically. And I went to art school and did a lot of figure drawing and life drawing, and didn't really know what I was going to do with these skills. I started teaching myself 3D animation and stuff actually when I was in seventh grade. I got a hack copy of Cinema 4D and learned it. Just read the manual. Was really interested in animation and 3D, but I never really put it together that real-time 3D and video games and all of that would connect with my drawing, would help direct these kind of games. Uh, but yeah, I thought I was going to do visual effects. I thought I was going to do movies, and I actually did a couple very small like TV ads before I got a job in the game industry.
So you live in Los Angeles, right?
Yes, I'm in Los Angeles.
And have you always lived in Los Angeles?
No, I grew up in Ojai, which is a small town a couple hours north of LA. It's near Ventura, but it's this sleepy little valley that is very beautiful, and a lot of nature hikes and gorgeous mountains, and also a lot of wildfires. Uh, but yeah, we'd always come down to LA to you know check out the cool things happening. But it was a very sleepy little town.
Yeah, Ojai is beautiful. I've been there, and it's. I also live in LA, and I asked about that because it's at the time. I would say 20 years ago, LA was the place you needed to be if you wanted to get into the FX industry, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's I remember my dad and I just drove down to LA to check out art schools when I was in high school, and that's why we came here, because this is where the industry was. This is where visual effects was, and everybody who was going to art schools in LA was just going right into that industry. Um, and I knew a whole bunch of people who did that, did motion graphics and all this kind of thing. And it just so happened that um, like the Sony studios, Naughty Dog Studios, and That Game Company, which was embedded in Sony, were all just on the same block as these other studios that were doing TV ads. And so I just walked over and did an interview one day.
Oh, that's really cool. So it wasn't. It was sort of serendipity that you got into the industry. You saw a job opening and walked in.
It was a weird thing where I was graduating from art school at Otis College of Art and Design,
Mhm.
and you, as a senior there, you do a senior show, and they invite industry people to come check out the portfolios of the students, and it's mostly um, visual effects people and stuff. But Genova Chen, the creative director, founder of That Game Company, swung by for my senior show, and he saw my stuff, and they had actually hired another Otis grad before, and I had already gotten kind of a gig going, but I was like, let's stay in touch, and eventually, um, I ended up working at That Game Company with him. So that kind of connection formed there, but kind of took shape a little later. Yeah.
Got it. And so you worked on Journey, which I admit is one of my favorite games of all time. And, and you were the art director, right?
That is correct. Yes.
Wow. That was, I mean, Journey had such to me at least, a unique style. Was there anything in particular outside of your childhood travels that inspired you for the art on Journey?
The art from Journey was this thing that it was very difficult to discover and to come to, because that game, we worked on it for about 3 years, and we started with almost nothing. We had just this idea that we wanted to make a multiplayer game where you were going to befriend people instead of competing with them or shooting them with guns, and and there wasn't really much beyond that. And my task was, what does that look like? and the characters and everything took a lot of discovery, a lot of redoing and refining to come upon. And yeah, we kind of listened to players, and I kind of tried to make the art in the game reflect what I was drawing and painting, because we just knew that we couldn't make something that was trying to be photoreal, or like we just didn't have these kind of resources. A lot of it was defined by the constraints that we had, and trying to make something that could be timeless, that could last within those constraints. That was kind of the challenge for that project.
Well, congratulations on delivering something that really was stunning and was well recognized by the industry for breaking new ground.
Thank you. Yeah, it was crazy. Like you never expect to have that kind of reaction to it, but sometimes you can never predict it. That game it really resonated with people, and it's just really, really awesome to have seen that happen.
Yeah. So as you were, well, maybe I'll ask this independent of that game company. Do you remember the moment that you decided to start Giant Squid?
After I finished Journey, everybody on the team kind of dispersed, that they went their separate ways. And I had this kind of choice of what I wanted to do next. I was in this position where I could go work at another studio, or I could do my own thing. And I had this idea for a short film that I wanted to try making. And it was going to be this underwater thing about a diver, going to the bottom of the ocean. Because I had these experiences as a scuba diver that were inspiring me to make this. And I did this little trailer for it, and a little animated short. Like, okay, this is the concept piece. And I started showing it to some people I knew, and they all said, "This is a video game. You got to make this a game." And I was like, "I guess you're right. I guess you're right." And eventually, that was kind of the impetus for starting the studio to make that game, and to see if we could do it. And the the launch trailer for ABZÜ was basically a amped up version of that initial trailer that I had made.
That was a beautiful. I remember that launch trailer. I remember it was unveiled at E3 during a press conference, wasn't it?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah. It was. That was quite a break for us. As a kind of startup with no history or anything, to be able to get on the stage for a Sony press conference at E3, that was pretty much unheard of. So we really lucked out.
Well, at that point, were you guys already in production, or was it early on in creating ABZÜ?
Very early on. It was a lot earlier than we had planned to reveal it. And we had barely started making. We had the character controls, just in a prototype phase, and it was very much just a vision and a couple people thinking about it still. So.
Okay, so here's a crazy question. How much earlier than the press conference had you come up with the name for Giant Squid?
Oh, well, the name that came out earlier, a lot earlier.
A lot earlier. Okay.
Yeah. We had discovered we knew the idea of the game was going to be this underwater thing. It was supposed to be mysterious, and so, what was an underwater mysterious thing that evoked that sense for the company? Now we're the squids.
Got it. I only asked that just selfishly because when we were early on at Insomniac, we were Extreme Software, XTREME,
Uh-huh.
and we were working on our first game, Disruptor, and we realized that we had an opportunity to show it at, I think it was the second E3 way back, and we had to change our name because another company actually was using Extreme and had dibs on it. So we had a couple weeks to figure out what our name was. So
Whoa.
you guys sound like you were a lot more organized than we were.
Yeah, we were thinking about it, and then after we kind of said, okay, this is going to be it, then I realized like, oh my God, there's like a bunch of indie games with the word giant in their name. There's like Super Giant and Giant Sparrow, and there's also like Giant Bomb. And, like there's like so many giant things. Oh no, but it was too late.
That's funny. Well, it fits. I mean, Giant Squid's a great name. I actually didn't even think about Super Giant or any of the others. Giant Squid seems to work, and that's just me being subjective. But
it's fun.
So now, having started Giant Squid and gotten started on ABZÜ, you had made the transition from being an art director to now a creative director and head of your own studio. What was that transition like for you?
It was a big jump, and I didn't really know quite what that meant. You know, I had worked on Flower as an art director, but it was really my first game gig, and I learned a lot there, and then worked on Journey all the way through from start to finish, and as an art director. But it was a small team over at That Game Company, and everybody was doing a lot of things, and I was doing a lot more than just art direction. I was a level designer. I was an environment artist, animator, concept artist, and narrative designer. I mean, I did all of that stuff. And so all of that experience kind of handling a lot of things really helped. But, you know, I hadn't managed a company. I hadn't, you know, directed programmers and hiring and all these kinds of things. And, you know, we learned a lot in that process. And the main thing that happened was that it took us a long time to find the right people to join the team. And so that kind of delayed our ramp up, and the whole thing got a little squished at the end, a little bit crazy. And, you know, the scope of the game shifted and changed. And we realized that I was kind of a bottleneck. You know, I loved to do all of those things that I had done on Journey, but now there was all these people who needed more from me. They needed more direction, and they needed, in addition to just needing animation files or the level to be done so they could prototype whatever, you know, they also needed design docs and all this kind of thing. And so after we shipped ABZÜ, we had this conversation, which was like, okay, well, that was really hard, you know, why? And how can we make it so that you're less of a bottleneck, and what roles should we hire, and how can we change up the team's makeup to address that core issue? You know? So that's kind of the main thing that we did that allowed us to kind of make a bigger game for the Pathless, I think.
If it makes you feel any better, I ran into the exact same problem. I was a bottleneck as a creative director and trying to run the company at the same time. And you addressed it, I think, probably 5 games before I did. So your team is probably much better off as a result. But it's a great lesson, I think, for anybody who starts a company who is taking on a key creative role, right? There's so many other things that you don't realize you have to do when you're running a company and responsible for the well-being of all the team members.
Yes, you know, and because what I realized at least was that it was so hard to find these people who they are so valuable, these team members. They're the real value of the company, and you got to take care of them, like you say, and you have to make sure that they're happy and fulfilled and want to keep working with you, so that you don't have to keep starting over from zero every time. And that is a trick to pull off, you know. And then you also have to, I'm sure you've experienced this as well, many more times than me. But once the project's over, you better get something else going,
That's
because
right.
you got to keep the people on board. That's a trick.
It's a great point for anybody who is thinking about getting into business. That is, we are in this. I wouldn't say it's a flywheel, but we are constantly having to look for the next thing as in this industry. Unless you're working on a multiplayer game that has a established base of players, it's a challenge, and it's the responsibility of the person who's in charge of the studio to make sure everybody has a job right after the game ships.
Yes, and there's a whole bunch of ways that you can achieve that. Lots of studios start to make multiple games at the same time, or bring in multiple creative directors to kind of, again, address the bottleneck, of just having one guy with a vision having to come up with the golden idea that's going to keep everything going.
Sure.
Because that's a risky thing. So far that's how we've been operating, and it's tricky to break out of that. But it takes a lot of trust in your team, and it takes a big shift, and you can't make those shifts all the time, especially mid production. So
Right.
it's a challenge.
Well, you mentioned vision. So, did you have a specific vision for your culture when you started the company?
Yeah, I didn't really think about a vision for it in that way, but it really kind of was a key element, because when I was working at That Game Company, the culture there at that time, at least, was very difficult. It was a very there's a lot of angry people, a lot of arguing and yelling and emotion in that space, and it was trying. And everyone was trying to make this brilliant thing, but they all had their own kind of idea of what it should be. And I wanted to make a place where it was just really fun and collaborative, and obviously there's going to be tough questions, and you got to say no, and you got to critique, and you got to whittle ideas down, but you could do it in a way that's positive, and that's why we really took our time hiring, was to make sure that everybody was on the same page, or culture fit, that everybody could be friends with each other. And so the vision of what that culture was started out as this very simple thing, like, let's just be friends. And then it evolved with the personalities that we brought on. And now there is this very kind of Giant Squid culture that exists. We've really focused on that, and everybody is, as far as I can tell, at least, okay. And they're having fun while they work on these games. So I'm very proud of that aspect of the company.
That's really commendable. Are there specific things that you do to manage conflicts in a way that feels appropriate for your culture? Because guaranteed there are conflicts, right? I mean, you guys, I'm sure you have some disagreements on
things. Absolutely, all the time. My thing is, I'm a very opinionated guy. That's kind of my job, is to be able to say yes to this and no to that. So that just comes with the space of the work, is to have these conflicts that have to be resolved, and it's tricky because it's different for everybody, on the team, and you have to really listen to everybody. And this is something that I've been learning even over the course of the development of the Pathless just recently. We have had to deal with the different issues that arise with different people in different ways, and it just helps to listen. You have to listen, and you have to also have a way to test the game that's empirical and not emotional. And everybody, that's the kind of thing that actually got us through on Journey, even when things were difficult. It was like, okay, everybody can't agree on what the direction here is. Let's just put in a play test and see how players react. And everybody can understand that if they don't get it, then it's not working, So you kind of have this final tool to get through the toughest disagreements, but it really helps to listen and check in with everybody, and I wasn't a real big fan of like the one-on-ones and the kind of corporate idea of like managing people, but we've started doing one-on-ones recently, and a lot of times I actually have other people help me do them, and then I talk to them about how it went, because I think that some people can be more open if they're not talking directly to the boss. You know what I mean? So it's figuring out the best way for people to be able to express what they're going through, because you don't want to be surprised.
In a company of your size, do you have bandwidth to have people be devoted to, say, managing people exclusively, or do you have, for example, leads who are creating assets but also managing folks, or is that all on you?
It's a definite thing that we've tried different arrangements, of different structures, and when you're really small, everybody is aware of what everybody else is doing, and depending on how tight your culture is, you can keep that up until a certain point. And even if your culture is fantastic, everybody's on the same page, at a certain number of people, you just can't keep it all in your head.
Right.
So you have to now have some kind of hierarchy and some kind of tracking and all this kind of thing. And what we've kind of realized happened during the development of The Pathless, which was, a much bigger game than ABZÜ, was that I just couldn't handle directing every element of the game. And I would have to kind of delegate that direction a bit to some of my leads. And we kind of started to build this structure. And so now we've kind of had that same conversation we had at the end of ABZÜ, what's the changes that we need to make our lives easier next time. And we've kind of decided to that the next step of unbottlenecking the team against me is to delegate more of that direction. And luckily I've found these kind of great devs who I can trust, and to be able to do that. And so I just am able to say, okay, the prototype that we want to make is going to go for this, and I'll write up a design doc, and I'll write notes and draw concept art and all this kind of thing, and then they'll be able to help get a version of that to a certain state while I'm working on another part of the game. And then I'll check in on it and do critiques and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of our approach this time. But yeah, it's definitely kind of going in this direction of requiring more trust from me in the team itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to reference where we are in terms of time. Since we are still in the middle of a pandemic, how did the events of 2020 change how that worked for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because we were all working in a shared, like a little studio space, right? And we had a fun time just hanging out together, and the culture was very much, about being in the same place. And we had started to hire some remote people because it was just hard to find people, right? So we had a person on the other side of the country in a different time zone, and even when we just had hired this one remote person, we had to basically get up to speed on remote work, because everybody had to work with them, and they were in a different time zone. So we bought everybody headsets, and we got cameras and started doing all that video conferencing and everything before the pandemic. And so when the pandemic hit, the only difference was we were just like, okay, well, everybody take their computer home. That's it. And so it was weird because it was surprisingly easy to make that shift for us. Um, and at the same time, we were working with Apple, on the art, like they're publishing the game for iPhones and things, and just seeing how they struggled through this, like it was fundamentally different because of their scale. Like they just could not pivot that quick, and they were completely out of commission uh, for a good month or 2 months or 3 months before you could really kind of get a hold of somebody over there.
Huh.
Whereas we were just like, okay, we're still working, like, and it was the toughest thing was mostly on the morale and just seeing everybody because we enjoyed hanging out together, and so that was the toughest part for us.
Has it have the events of the last year changed how you look at work and over the next, say, 5 or so years? Has it brought permanent changes for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely made us realize that there were a lot of things that we could not have done if we were not able to work this way. When we were shipping the game, you're going through cert and you need somebody and it's this crazy time and hey, you could just call them and you can share the screen and you can get it done. And, there was a few times when things just really happened fast because you already knew that everybody had a remote setup, like everybody in the industry. My favorite example was at the very last minute, we brought on Troy Baker and Laura Bailey to do voice recording for characters in our game.
Mm-hmm.
And right up until the last minute, we were like, oh my God, what are we going to do with the voice acting in this game? And I mean, it was down to the wire. And like over the course of like 3 days, we connected with them, made it all happen, and transformed the game. And that whole process just would not have been as fast. So for the future of the company, the immediate future is that we're not going to renew our lease, on our space, because there's not enough certainty yet to kind of commit to going back. And right now, why are you paying for this big overhead? So at the moment, we're just going to be in a remote state indefinitely until we get some certainty.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah,
I think that's great flexibility, and seems like a smart call to me to do that, especially if it's working. I mean, you guys were also able to ship a launch title for the PlayStation 5, which is incredible. I mean, that's doing that in a pandemic, and I can say that from personal experience is not easy. And the fact that The Pathless is a launch title for the PlayStation 5 must have also been a cool experience for you. Was it cool?
It was super cool. It was. You always hear devs talk about, oh man, if you can be a launch title, that's so cool. That's the dream. You're going to get out there. Everybody's going to, you're going to be on every list of launch titles forever. People are going to remember your game. It's like this huge ticket, and it doesn't roll around every time. And so we were able to line it up, and what a cool experience to be a part of. And the PlayStation 5 is a really neat piece of hardware. It really elevated the game in a lot of ways. We were able to use it to make the game really run nice.
Oh yeah, I mean it is so smooth. It's your key mechanic, the sliding and shooting really feels good at the frame rate you have it running, and of course the game looks gorgeous too.
Thank you. Yeah, and like you said, it was a challenge, and but once you kind of do that during a pandemic, you kind of realize, we could probably do anything. So it was, every challenge is different. We've never started a new project or prototype to, we finished one. And the difference is that when you're at the tail end of a project, everything is just a list. It's like, okay, go through the bug list and fix everything. Everybody knows exactly what to do. Everything is very highly scheduled. So it is definitely different than, the beginning, and how do you do that remotely? But being able to do that has given us a lot of confidence.
Well, speaking of the beginning of the Pathless, and by the way, I didn't ever congratulate you on the Pathless. It's, again, congratulations on the game. And I was wondering about how you made the decision after ABZÜ to start a new IP. And I only ask this because sequels, right? Sequels tend to be the sort of most obvious next step once you spent all of that creative energy creating a new IP. But you guys went for it and took a sort of created a new direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was your thought process behind that?
Yeah, is maybe not the most genius thought process at first, but but the idea was, that we felt like ABZÜ was a contained experience, that it didn't really make sense for a sequel. Mm-hmm. And the other reason was that when we first started designing ABZÜ, the design was much more like The Pathless. It was going to be an open world, and you were going to visit landmarks around this big reef, and there's a kelp forest over here, and you can go any which way, and eventually you're trying to get down to the bottom of the ocean. That was kind of the structure. But what we realized was that as we prototyped it, the underwater environment made it hard to do that for one real important reason, which is that you can't really see far underwater.
Yeah.
And so we after the game shipped, we were like, well, we ended up making a game that worked for the story we wanted to tell and the space that we wanted to inhabit and the atmosphere that we wanted to create. And the structure was dictated by that. And then we were like, well, what if we wanted to, what would the atmosphere, what would the environment be that would make it easier to do the structure that we want to make? And the answer was, instead of going down, go up to a floating island. This play on this basic instinct of people that you want to get up higher, mm-hmm. and you want to see far. So, make a character that can fly and jump, and all these things kind of fell out from this idea of like, how could we actually make that game and make it intuitive with the kind of metaphor of the art and the atmosphere. So yeah, as we continue, the thought of, is it smarter to make a sequel or something in the same universe? It uses the same tools and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's something that we still consider and is probably going to be the right choice someday. But at that point, we felt like shifting the IP was going to be the way to let us achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Well, at what point did Annapurna get involved?
Very early. After ABZÜ shipped, well, actually, before ABZÜ shipped, we anticipated this common problem, which is, that, hey, the money runs out and you haven't made enough sales yet to, be in profit, and you got to bridge this gap to the next project. And I mean, that was a tough moment for us between the projects. I mean, we were skating on very thin ice, and luckily, I was able to pitch The Pathless while we were in our last phase of development for ABZÜ, and we showed it around, and Annapurna got it. They were new, but they were being headed up by people that I knew and had from before and trusted, and we decided to work together, and they helped us bridge that gap.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have been such a great supporter of new IP, groundbreaking IP, right? IP that needs to be different. It's awesome.
Yeah, Nathan Gary, the guy who heads up Annapurna over there, he's got an eye for that. He can really kind of see the value in a small game, even in its early stages. It's a very valuable part of the industry to
Yeah.
have that.
So, in making The Pathless during production, what was the biggest challenge for you?
Oh man, there were so many, but
What was your favorite big challenge, or maybe your least favorite big challenge?
it was interesting when we started the game. I knew that it was going to be this shadowy forest, and I knew that there was going to be archery and this eagle, but we didn't know much more. Um, and it took us a long time to discover the not the moment to moment stuff. Both on ABZÜ and Pathless, we pretty immediately got the character movement and control. We had that shooting, bounding, flying thing very early, the moment to moment stuff. But what you were doing every 20 minutes was tricky because we knew we were going to have these bosses and we knew we were going to um, go higher and higher up this island. But the landmarks and the puzzles and the kind of spirit vision that lets you see distant um, goals to go and check out came on very late,
Hmm.
and we tried a whole lot of things to figure out that one, but it kind of became a signature element of the game that there's no map, that instead you are using the terrain itself to get up high and get on top of some tower or something and look out and figure out the mapping in the world. Your navigation is tied to the exploration in a really interesting way that's very different, and it kind of defined the way that you interact with this world and made it different than other open world structured games. So it was a big challenge, but it also became one of the coolest parts of the game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, that's one of the things that helps the game stand apart. Uh, yeah, and speaking of challenges, you go head to head with teams that are almost 10 times your size. Right? And you mentioned constraints at the beginning of our talk, and it's pretty amazing to watch Giant Squid embrace those constraints in the game design and the art style that you choose. Do you sort of actively and enunciate those constraints as you guys are going into production and say, hey, we have this many people, we have this much time,
You
let's
know,
figure
it's
out our scope within those constraints?
it's interesting because, um, like you say, those constraints really define the design and what we can do. But it also is a way to get to an elegant design.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that I really strive for, is to make it elegant, to make it as simple as it can possibly be and still express the full experience. And um, I think that there's a danger when those constraints aren't there, that it can become muddied, or it can become, there can be extraneous things in the game that don't really need to be there. And it's like, well, if you don't really need it, why is it there?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to me, some of my favorite games that I grew up with, Shadow of the Colossus, Ico, the Ueda games, they were big budget, big, experience games, but very constrained as well, and elegant, and that was their strength. And so, it's something that um, the actually kind of got burned into me working at that game company, because they do that. They do say, you know what, these are the limits. These are that's a really cool thing you made, but you're going to have to get rid of it because we're not going to be able to do that. Like that was kind of their workflow. Um, when we started Giant Squid, my thing is I'm the guy who kind of shoots for like the bigger scope version, and then the team kind of shoots me down. I'm pushing the limit on, well, could we do something like this? But at the same time, I balance that with trying to find that the core and just letting only the elements that need to be there exist. So.
I think it's great that the team is willing to say, hey, no, crazy creative director, we need to go back on this. I mean, I've been in that position, and it's sometimes people are intimidated.
I think it's true. And that's where the culture comes in. I know that it can be tough to talk to me because I'm the boss man. And, I wasn't always the boss man. I was in that position too. So I know how it was. And I want to make it so that, acknowledge that that's always going to be the case in some way, but make it so that it is possible that, the people can talk to me, and if they can't talk to me, talk to someone else. And
are there any things that you do specifically to put people at ease and reassure them that it's okay to tell you no?
I just talk to people. I'll just, like I'll talk to my animator about the game design. I'll talk to my game designer about the animation. I'll talk to everybody about everything, and concept artists about what they think about the feel, and because just to make it so that like I don't, like, even when we were in the same space, I didn't have my own office. I was just in one big room with everybody. I was just trying to make it feel like I'm just another person on the team, and I think that obviously there is a hierarchy, and I think that there's a value to the hierarchy, so that there can be direction and there can be choices made that help limit the scope of what any one person on the team has to worry about. But at the same time, I'm accessible and the leads are accessible, and trying to just make sure that that is clear, is really important.
I agree. I mean, that's a great message to have, where we're always accessible. I think that for all of us as craftspeople, it is pretty easy to get so caught up that we forget that we may think we're accessible, but without reminders, most people may not be accessing us.
That's true. And it does take a consistent effort, that you have to put in to make that happen, and got to do your best, I guess.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit just in the waning moments we have about being an independent developer. And what do you think is different today about being an independent developer versus, say, 5 years ago?
Oh, yeah, this is a great question. I think the biggest thing is that there's just so many more independent developers out there, and which is fantastic. I remember people asking me this question, back when I was working on Journey, and the answer was, well, it's amazing because there's there's so much room for new ideas and new people to come in, and now it's like, hey, everybody's made it. People are able to make video games, and that's so cool. I was always advocating for that, and now there's a lot of really great tools that are free, and the question now is, how do you make your game say something worthwhile? Because it's not just a matter of standing out, which of course is super important, especially when, like you say, you go up against teams 10 times your size. You got to have something that makes you competitive. But at the same time, the space is full of people who are doing smaller things, and that allows them to do more creative things and say interesting things. And so I think that the question now is, what are you going to say?
Mm-hmm.
Because the world needs some help. It needs some advice. it needs some direction and some guidance and some help. And I think that video games, their great power is to make a connection with people, and they can say something and they can affect people. And so, that's what we're always trying to think about. What is worth saying.
I think that is an absolutely wonderful note to conclude on. I can't think of a stronger statement, frankly. Seriously, I hope that any person who is interested in getting into development or becoming a creative director can think about those words and answer them for themselves, because it'll make our industry, a better place and have a more positive impact on the world. Yeah,
I think when I think about the games that I grew up with, they influenced who I am today, and as developers, that's what we're making for people who are playing them as kids now. It's going to make people who they are. So,
well, very cool. I if people have questions for you, are you active on social media?
Yes, I am. I mean, I don't speak too much, but I will respond to people and on Twitter, and we've got a Discord where we're kind of building our community as well around our games.
Okay. What is your Twitter handle?
@Matt_Nava.
Okay. Well, great. Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Really nice to talk to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.